temporarily installing the outboard flap false bar so we can set up the outboard flap hinge. The outboard flap false bar is held on with number 4 PK screws in the tops of the ribs and the bottoms of the ribs, just like the aileron false bars, but it uses number 6 machine screws and nuts to hold on in the cove area, unlike the aileron false bars. So I'm not going to put the machine screws in yet. I'm just going to go ahead and install this temporarily with the PK screws in the ribs, and I'm not going to worry about the holes being oversized or anything here. I'm just putting this on temporarily to set up that flap hinge, and we'll be taking it on and off a couple of times before we put it on permanently. I'm going to put the bolt that holds the flap hinge on through the rear spar so I can put the angle that acts as a doubler for the flap hinge on and get it installed. I use a little scribe here to stick through the bottom hole where the Z-screw goes in, get it lined up so I can put the Z-screw in to hold that angle plate down. Now I'll put the flap hinge in there and bolt it up, and so we can get it aligned and figure out where to put the bracket on there to get the bracket mounted up on it. A little paint through the wing spar and powder coat on the parts going in there. The bolt won't slide through very easily, so we'll get a wrench and screw that thing in there. I'm tightening that down with a wrench, but I'm not going to leave it tight, permanent tight. I'm just tightening it down and taking the slop out of it so I can adjust that hinge around to make sure and get the lined up with the other hinge. And we're going to put the inboard false bar on so I can line that hinge up with the outboard flap hinge. Got to lay on my back here to get the bolt up in there. There's a lip on that inboard flap false bar that snaps over the spar and holds it in position, so I didn't really need to line it up too much. I lined up the holes in the outboard false bar with the inboard false bar and in with the ribs, and then went ahead and put the nut onto the inboard flap hinge and tightened it up so I can use it to line up to the outboard flap hinge. The bracket for the new flap hinge didn't even come close to matching up with the contour of the flap false bar there. So here I'm comparing the old bracket on the old hinge with the new bracket on the new hinge to see what the differences are. I took the bracket over to the workbench and used some specialty tools to adjust the wings on that to try to get the contour to match up a little better with the contour of the false bar there. Here I'm trying it out. Probably going to make a few more adjustments to it. The tabs on the new bracket were bent out at a lot sharper angle, almost 90 degrees, compared to the old tabs on the old bracket. It turned out that they were for the aileron false bars and not for the flap false bar. Here I'm showing my super secret tab adjustment tool as I make some final adjustments on that tab to make it fit the contours properly. I've got those tabs lined up so that they fit the contour of that flap false spar just perfectly now. I've knocked a lot of the powder coat off of them, and they got a few little bulges in them where I changed the angle of the bend, so I'm going to take that down to the shop and straighten those bulges out, the little counter bends out, and sandblast that tab, that bracket, and powder coat it again, and then we'll get it installed. But it's just about perfect now. I've been working on getting these false spars put on here. The first thing I did was go along here on the butt end of these ribs and these spacers or brackets for the false spars for the ailerons, and I cut out some little sheet metal pieces in there and riveted on for doublers behind, because most of the holes, not all of them, but most of the holes were all hogged out to the point where screws wouldn't hardly tighten up in them. I put the outboard aileron false spar on first, and bolted up that outboard aileron hinge, and that worked really good. I was really happy with the way those screws went in there into those parts where they were loose before. Well, then I went ahead and put the inboard aileron false spar on, and that went pretty good too. I got that all bolted up, the hinges bolted up and everything on that. Then it was time to work on the outboard flap false spar. I got a new flap hinge, the outboard flap hinge on there, and I need to figure out where the bracket on that attaches to the false spar goes. I put the false spar on there temporarily. I put a few screws in it. Now I'm going to have to change some of those screws out because some of the holes are hogged out and I'm going to have to move them. But basically I put it up there just as a temporary thing to set up that flap hinge. Well, I got to thinking about it, and I needed some way of making sure that flap hinge was lined up properly so that the pivot point in the hinge point that the flap pivots on, was in alignment with the other hinge. So I went ahead and put the inboard flap false spar on and bolted that hinge up. Then I decided I need a 1/4 inch rod to go between those two so I can set up the alignment. Well, I thought I was going to have to go to town and buy a 1/4 inch rod someplace. So I finished up here. It was time to go down for dinner. And then I got to thinking, well, maybe I had some 1/4 inch rod long enough to do that. I remembered buying some brass copper rod. Come up here to the basement to check, and sure enough, I've got some brass rod, but it's 1/2 inch and I think 3/8. But they had this piece, and I think this is copper, but that's 1/4 inch, and that's 6 feet long. Well, it's not 6 feet long anymore because I cut a piece off of it to use for some project or something, and it wound up being just as inexpensive for me to buy it, a whole long piece, to have it shipped to me as it was to have a short piece shipped to me. So anyway, probably be using that for something else sometime, but I've got it. So I came up here and run that through that inboard flap hinge and into the outboard flap hinge, and that should line that up pretty good. It slides through there good the way it is now, so that's a good indication that the holes are lined up the way they're supposed to be. Well, now tomorrow I'll go ahead and sandblast that bracket, powder coat it again, because I knocked all the powder coat off of it fooling around with it, adjusting it to make it fit. They sent me the wrong bracket. I got to looking, and there are 2 different part numbers for the brackets. There's one bracket that's used here on the aileron hinges, and well, there's 3 different brackets. There's one bracket that's used on the inboard flap hinge that's different than all the rest of them, and then there's one bracket that is used on all 3 aileron hinges that's the same, and then there's a bracket that's similar to those but it's different for the outboard flap hinge. But I was able to modify that one to make it work. And then once I get it on, I have to drill holes for it to line it up in the right position and then rivet it onto that false spar. And once I do that, then I can go ahead and mount that up permanently. And the inboard false spar, I've still got some stuff to add on in there. I still got to put that bell crank for the flap operation on in there and a couple other things in that area. So we'll get that done, and then this trailing edge will be pretty much done. Okay, well, back up here at midnight again. I guess I'm going to head back down to the house and get ready for bed. It seemed like I fumbled around with this false spar and this hinge all day today. It wasn't quite that bad because it was a really nice day today, and we've had some really nice weather the last week or so. It's warmed up a bunch. It rained a little bit for a few days and the wind blew and all the snow has disappeared. Well, there was a couple of things I wanted to do outside. Well, I worked outside for a while today, But then I fumbled around with this thing for a lot longer than I would have thought. Got it all lined up last night, and then fixed this so that it fit, this bracket so it fit, because it was the wrong bracket. It wasn't shaped anywhere near close to what it should have been to fit on this. Well, I got it lined up, and then I started drilling the bracket out, and I must have made a dozen trips back and forth and back from the shop to up here, trying to find the right drill bit to drill this clearance hole out for this hold down screw and this bolt here. And I had a heck of a time with that. It took a number 18 or 19 drill bit to drill that clearance hole out, and of course I thought at first that it was number 6 instead of a number 8, so I drilled it that way, and then I drilled it with a 19. I finally found a 19 and I drilled it with that, and I couldn't get that bolt through there, so I come up looking for an 18, and I finally found an 18, drilled it again, but it still didn't work because this hole through the bracket wasn't the right size. So when I finally got that drilled and that working, then it went right. Then I went and put the little screw and a turning screw in. I drilled a hole for that, and I drilled it on the wrong side, so I had the bracket set on there the wrong way. Anyhow, we're ready to nail this thing on there now. It's set up to where it should be lined up just perfect for that. That looks pretty good despite my best efforts. No, I can't even get on that one. Not like that. No way I can't get on that one at all. Not like that. Alright, so that one's got to go backwards. It's the only way to do that. You can't get on it with a driver at all. In fact, even getting in there with a bucking bar would be a challenge. There's that rod. Alright, that's as good as it's going to get. It doesn't look good because it's in that hole and the hole's elongated. It doesn't make a very good pattern there, but it's got into the doubler back in the back just fine, so that should be good. Alright, that's it. That's on there. I don't know how to do it any better than that. Yeah, that filled that hole a lot better, but it's still into that doubler. The doubler's got a nice clean hole in it, so that is good. Alright, I would have liked it better if I could put a factory head on this side, but there's no way I could get in there with a driver and do that. Barely got a bucking bar in there to make a shop head on that, but it turned out pretty good. I'm happy with that. That'll work. 100 years, nobody will know the difference anyway. Might as well put that back on. I got an air nozzle here someplace. I'm going to blow all the chips and stuff out of that before I get too far along. I wound up with a lot of shavings coming in on the fabric underneath this false spar. Chafed through the fabric there, made a mess. But I don't want to do the same thing with this as what they did to me. So I'm going to see if I can't find that air nozzle and blow that thing out and get all the chips and stuff out of there. Well, I got the false spars on there, or the aileron false spars anyway. They're on there and all mounted up. Look prettier than they did when I took them off. I started putting the peripherals on there. I got almost everything on there. That's a bracket for one of the aileron pulleys, the upper one. And here's the inboard aileron hinge. And then that's a bracket there for the idler pulley for the aileron drag cable, carry-through cable. There's a forward attach fitting for the jury strut, forward jury strut, and the rear jury strut is attached right there. Got the outboard flap hinge attached, and the outboard flap false spar is all fixed up and attached. That thing is beautiful, should be good. I don't have the inboard flap false bar set up on there yet because I just put this bell crank on, and I don't have the spring yet for the flap return spring. I've got the bolts in the hinge points there for the wing spars on both of them. I put the cross tube in that goes through the fuel tank. Now it's just temporarily tied in on this end because this has got to come loose here to come up to slide the fuel tank in there. And then we've got the inboard drag strut, and that's all attached. And it looks a lot prettier than it did before. There's the other forward hinge point, forward spar. So that is pretty nice. I'm happy with that. Still have to wait for that spring for the flap return spring. And I've got the fittings here for the wingtip bow that attach to the spar. I don't have the struts, the stiffeners, or for the wingtip bow put on there yet because they just stick out and they'll just get bent up from walking by it and stuff until I get ready to put that wingtip bow on. And my friend that bought me a piece of white oak is bringing it up. He sent me a message a couple days ago, said he'll be here tomorrow, so we'll be able to get that piece of white oak and get it machined down and milled up and make that wingtip bows and get this thing put together. So I've still got to work on the wingtip leading edge skin, get it cleaned up, and the landing light assembly, and get that cleaned up, and I can get it put on. I can't put any of the leading edge skins on until we get the wingtip one done, and the bow, I guess. The bow's got to go on first, and then that wingtip leading edge skin, and then the skins go on progressively towards the inboard. Well, anyway, I'm happy with that. It feels a whole lot better getting together than it does coming apart. Now I can take the aileron drag carry-through cable and run it back through there again, put those pulleys back in, run the wires for the landing lights. I was thinking about getting new cables for the landing lights. That's a 10 gauge cable, as I thought, as old as it is, it might be getting kind of worn, shop worn and stuff there from being in, but I got to looking at it and the insulation on it is all real good and everything looks real good on it, so I'm just going to put it back in. I've got to run the nav light wire. So that wing looks pretty good now. I guess I'll go work on the leading edge and the landing lights. Oh, the only other thing I've got to do is the pitot tube mount. This is the pitot tube mount, and I've got to put it on, and it was kind of bent up a little bit. Somebody had hit the pitot tube probably more than once as it hangs out of the airplane. I don't know why, because it's back behind the struts or between the struts where it's hard to get to, but it had been banged up a few times and was bent up, and I'm debating whether I want to cut a piece as a doubler in there, and I'm thinking maybe putting nut zerts in there so the screws go in and out. See those holes are pretty well hogged out there right now, so that thing was on there kind of loose. Well, anyway, that's what I'm thinking. I still have to put those two struts that go underneath the fuel tank in there in place of ribs. And I'll do that. I'll have my son help me turn that wing over and do it with it upside down before I put that on there.